When a murder happens, it's very rare, and it sends real shockwaves through the community.
It was like something out of a film that you would never see in your local street. What kind of person would actually do that?
The way in which she was disposed of is just utterly disgusting. The investigation had to be her voice. She wasn't there to say what happened to her.
It was quite clear the complete devastation that had been caused by the death of their daughter.
He's a manipulator. He's just a cold-hearted killer.
Just 16 miles south of Birmingham, but nestled in the rolling hills of Worcestershire, lies Bromsgrove.
Bromsgrove is a peaceful place, and it's very tranquil.
Not much here. Not much really happens.
There's quite a village feel to it because it's surrounded by countryside, and it's got country pubs, it's got a nice canal.
It's got a lovely community. They're all very friendly.
They know their neighbours and help each other out.
I've left several times. I always end up coming back home. It's where your heart is, really.
In the beating heart of Bromsgrove live the Solangis.
Nizam and Zubaydah lived in Talbot Road in Bromsgrove. Nice estate. And it has a row of shops, and in that row of shops was Nizam and Zubaydah's takeaway pizza business, Prego Pizza. It was owned by Nizam. Zubaydah would help and serve behind the counter.
And it was plainly quite a popular place for local residents to go to.
I don't know what they did with them pizzas, but their pizzas were really nice.
Zubaydah was very attractive. I took quite a shine to her. She'd just got this aura about her which sort of drew you in with her smile.
Nizam was very talkative. We had quite a few conversations with him. They seemed a very nice couple, very pleasant.
Nazim and Zubaydah are also proud members of the local Afghan community. They have 2 young children, one 6, the other just 4 years old.
She went about her daily life as best she could, loved her kids. They were the centre of her world.
She was a devoted mother, and the family life was everything for her.
But life in Talbot Road is about to change forever.
Hello, police. Nizam contacted West Mercia Police to report Zubaydah missing.
At the time, Nizam said that his wife had gone out for a run and never returned.
Nazim also reveals something else to police.
There were a number of texts on his phone that reported to have come from Zubaydah. One which said something along the lines of, I love someone else, I want to pass my time with them. Zubaydah had left him, and she had told him via text that she was going back to Afghanistan. She couldn't cope in the UK, didn't want to remain here, and of course had mentioned another man in her life.
Nazim had shown the texts to a friend at his mosque.
The gentleman concerned told Nizam that he should call the police and let them know that Zubaydah was missing, which of course he did.
But leaving her children behind seems at odds with devoted mother Zubaydah. Police launch a missing person inquiry.
Missing persons reports are taken very seriously, particularly when they are out of character. That inquiry would have been passed to a response officer via a patrol sergeant, and there are a template of inquiries that would have taken place in response to trying to find out where Zubaydah was.
The police will investigate places known to Zubaydah Salangi. So, for example, they would go to addresses that they know that she would go to. They would speak to people that she is associated with, just to see whether or not there is any information whatsoever that can help them locate Zubaydah.
There would also have been the local inquiries being conducted, house-to-house inquiries. Are there any footprints where they would normally be or not?
Investigators focus on Zubaydah's street, where she was reportedly last seen, going for a run.
When she was first reported missing, we were at home because we had a knock on the door from the police asking if we had seen her. The police asked us if we had any dashcam footage of their house. The police have took our SD card from the car, and obviously there was no footage on there. But apart from that, I found it to be a bit strange that she went missing. It was just very strange.
The police shortly after did put out a press release to the media saying, could we report that she was missing and if anybody had information about it, and it was front page news in Bromsgrove. I wrote articles on it at the time. She was a young mother of two and somebody who was well known in the area, and it seemed a surprise that she would suddenly disappear. It didn't seem to make sense, and a lot of people were interested in it and worried about her as well.
I was going through social media. It said that Zubaydah had gone missing on the Sunday. The neck hairs stood up. In my heart, I knew something terrible had happened. I commented on that post, a lovely woman, I hope she's found safe.
The reasons behind it just don't seem clear. It seemed like a bit of a mystery for the area, and especially as a lot of people had only seen her a few days before serving up pizzas in the takeaway.
There was no trace of Zubaydah anywhere, of course, apart from the text messages.
Detectives start investigating Zubaydah's links overseas.
Zubaydah Salangi was an Afghan national, and she was one of 8 children who lived in the Hindu Kush region, mountains just outside of Kabul.
Zubaydah was born in 1991 in Afghanistan. She was raised there with her extended family, brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, obviously her parents. She qualified as a maths teacher and actually worked in a school in Afghanistan.
And she was a highly educated woman and had aspirations.
Zubaydah came to the UK as a result of her marriage to Nizam Salangi. That was an arranged traditional marriage between the families. And Zubaydah came to the UK to be with Nizam in around 2013.
She carried on wanting to learn, and she was going to evening classes to do English at college.
She had a really strong work ethic, not only from working at Prego Pizza, but her desire and drive to help other people in terms of education. And it was ultimately to be her dream that she would work in the education system in the United Kingdom.
Investigators are puzzled. Inquiries reveal Zubaydah making a go of life in Britain. But her missing persons report suggests she's not happy with her life here.
And straight away, when you get a missing person inquiry like that, where it is totally out of character, that raises red flags. You just get that feeling that something is just not right.
Police start to scour the family home.
A search of the property would be conducted with the consent of the owner. That is standard in missing person inquiries. Checking loft spaces, etc., just to make sure that that individual isn't actually where they should be at home.
Nizam Salangi took police to show her wardrobe and an 8-inch gap in her clothes rail where she had taken clothing and left.
And there were 2 handwritten notes to the children explaining why she's left.
Police officers attended Prego Pizza and they searched the rear of the premises.
It was searched by a pulsar team, which is a number of officers who are specifically trained. They're licensed search officers. One of their major skills is searching, detailed searching, leave no void unexplored.
They searched, in particular, a storage area where there were many boxes.
In the rear storeroom, concealed on a shelf, which could only be accessed via stepladders, we found a purse which had been secreted behind a load of pizza packing boxes. That was Zubaida's purse. In that purse was her driving licence, some photographs of her children, and some cash.
It was something they felt that she wouldn't have left behind if she'd actually run off with somebody else.
In that same area, in a cavity within the wall space, was an iPhone box, a mobile phone box, wrapped in bubble wrap. And in there was a phone that subsequently transpired to be used by Zubaida to contact her family in Afghanistan.
That was a real pivotal moment for the police investigation.
It became quite obvious that something was severely wrong.
In Bromsgrove, mother of two, Zubaida Salangi, has been missing for nearly a week. As investigators continue searching the takeaway business she runs with her husband Nezim, word spreads across the local community.
I actually took it upon myself to drive past Prego Pizza because I'd been so upset. I didn't know what had happened, and I saw forensic vans, people in white suits carrying trays from Prego Pizza and putting them into the van. At that point, I think I knew that something is wrong.
Investigators start analysing their discoveries at the premises, Zubaida's phone and her driving licence.
It's a very significant find because Zubaida wasn't yet in possession of a British passport, so her driving licence would have been absolutely key for her as a form of identification. And of course, if she was going to leave, why would she leave images of her children who were very dear to her, as you would expect, at home and not take them with her? And then of course, her one means of contacting her family, that phone, was massively significant because that was her only support network, her contact with her family in Afghanistan.
By now, police have also spoken to Zubaida's family overseas.
It's very clear that she was someone who was very loved indeed by her family. Such was that love that they would regularly contact each other every single day.
Officers made contact with Mr. Valzadar, Zubaida's father, in Afghanistan, and it became apparent that he'd not heard from his daughter since the 27th of March.
And that was really unusual because she was so family orientated. So if Zubaida was planning to leave the country and go home, then her family would have been the first people that she'd contacted, and they would know that she was on her way. So the fact that they hadn't heard from her was really distressing.
The police would have understandably been very concerned at this stage because, having been shown by Nizam Salangi part of her wardrobe missing, text messages purportedly from her indicating that she had left him and the family. But in fact, having searched Prego Pizza, they discovered something completely different. So suspicions quickly turned on Nazim Salangi.
People in the local community are also questioning Nazim's claims.
It was common knowledge that Nizam had said she'd gone out for a jog on the Sunday and not come back.
Thought there's no way she would have been out jogging. No way. Because we never seen her apart from school runs, going to work, coming back from work. That's the only time I would see her. Definitely not for a jog.
Who goes out for a jog, leaving your children? Personally, myself, I never left my children in that situation, so that did not ring true at all.
On social media, there were a lot of questions. I think there was a lot of disbelief that she would have actually left the country. She seemed that she was quite settled here and she had a family, and it didn't seem to make sense.
Detectives soon discover something sinister about the seemingly happy couple.
For customers at the pizza parlour, they'd just see the couple behind the counter who were friendly and chatty, and it seemed like a normal marriage. A few people who got closer to them did comment that there were signs that maybe things behind closed doors weren't so happy.
I'd always try and make conversation, try and get Zubaida to sort of look at me, you know. She was a very shy person, but I think as I came to know them as a couple, there were a few red flags that I picked up on during my visits there. I noticed every time I spoke to Zubaida, Nizam would stop what he was doing and turn his head, and she would sort of crumble, go very quiet, look away, and not acknowledge that I was there, and she would sort of like fade into the background. I had a feeling that she wanted to communicate more but felt she couldn't. And I'd commented to my husband a few times that I felt he was controlling her. I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. I ended up fleeing to a women's refuge, and one of the things they teach you there is how to recognise a manipulator.
It was a relationship that was plagued with lots of troubles. She would regularly argue with Nizam.
I don't think it was a happy marriage. I sensed that Zubaida felt extremely trapped by the culture that she'd married into, trapped by the fact that she loved her kids and would do anything for them and would not leave for that reason. There was clearly some abuse, which was reflected in numerous phone calls between Zubaida and her family back in Afghanistan. She would contact them regularly. Her family would tell us that she would often speak of her unhappiness and her physical and emotional abuse within her marriage at the hands of Nizam.
Zubaida's friend Samantha confirms investigators' worst fears.
I told them I'd noticed a few red flags. The next thing, they asked me if they could come and take a statement from me, which they did do. And I said, one time I went in with my husband and I looked at Zubaida as I was stood waiting, and I noticed that she got a black eye. It looked like she'd covered it up with some foundation. It was purple and black, and I spoke to her. I asked her what she had done. All the time Nizam was glaring at her and said basically she'd banged it on the cooker hood. I didn't believe her immediately. I did not believe her. I was talking to my husband as we left the shop, and I said, I believe he's done that. I think he's going to end up killing her.
As the inquiry moved on, his willingness to assist began to dwindle, which also, of course, arose suspicions with the investigating officers.
Part of the investigation process by the police into this missing persons inquiry involved them looking at bank accounts, and they discovered that there had been transactions on one of her accounts in various locations.
Detectives spot transactions made after Zubaida reportedly went missing.
These were cash withdrawals in Birmingham. So, of course, CCTV inquiries are conducted at those cash points to see if we can establish who is withdrawing that cash.
And when they viewed that CCTV footage, they saw a figure who they believed to be Nizam Salangi. Understandably, the police would have been very suspicious of this, given what Nizam Salangi had previously told them, that she had run away with another man and wasn't coming back.
More significantly, an analysis of the phone data showed that the texts purportedly sent by Zubaydah from her phone to Nizam's phone were actually sent whilst her phone was in Bromsgrove.
This obviously led the police to be very suspicious indeed, and ultimately showed Nizam to be lying about Zubaydah having left the area.
We could tell from the location of Zubaydah's phone and the location of Nizam's phone at the time the text messages were sent that they were actually co-locating, and the phones were moving round together. So it couldn't have been Zubaydah who was sending those texts.
The police quickly concluded that Nizam Salangi had himself sent these messages using her mobile phone to message his phone.
He had actually been sending these texts to himself, pretending to be his wife.
It was clear that Nizam was fabricating a series of events to try and show some proof that Zubaydah was conducting her daily business, i.e. sending text messages, withdrawing money from the bank. We've got significant fines at Prego Pizza, the phone, the purse, and his unwillingness to cooperate with inquiries is amazingly suspicious and absolutely tipped the balance into something far more sinister or potentially likely a homicide.
With all this information, the police made the decision, and quite rightly, that a missing persons inquiry quickly became into a murder inquiry. And they attended Nizam's address on Talbot Road and arrested him on suspicion of murder.
In Bromsgrove, takeaway owner Nizam Salangi is in custody on suspicion of murdering his wife and mother of two, Zubaydah.
We learned that he'd been arrested, which was completely, massive shock.
At this point, we've gone from a missing person report to suspected murder, and that's huge in terms of how the community felt, but also what was being reported in the media. Murders were very rare in Bromsgrove, and it sent real shockwaves through the community.
From that day on, really, the whole street was swarmed with police cars, police vans, a massive tow truck to remove the cars.
It was headline news for us at the newspaper, and everyone wanted to know more about what could have led to this.
Most of the kind of like gossip that was going round was that they believed that Nizam had done something to her, and I think that just goes to show how many people kind of like had a feeling something was going on, like domestic abuse, didn't want to voice their opinions. I thought horrendous thoughts that he had killed her, and thoughts as to what I could have done differently. Was there anybody I could have gone and told?
Once you've decided to make an arrest, straight away the clock is ticking in respect of your ability and the time you have to deal with that individual you've got in custody. There's a lot of pressure on an SIO and their team to make ground as fast and as best as they can.
Investigators seize their suspect's mobile. What they find on it confirms what the family have told them.
Nizam had captured a video on his mobile phone. There'd clearly been a domestic argument on the 27th of March. The children were present in the house. It was clearly very emotional. They were arguing in Afghan.
In that argument, Zubaydah was holding a kitchen knife to her wrist in what was plainly a complete act of desperation. She was, by this stage, terribly unhappy in the relationship that she was in.
And threatening to self-harm, and locked herself in the bathroom. During it, she Yells at him that he'd destroyed her life for the last 8 years, which is how long they'd been married.
And basically saying to him, you carry on filming, you know, you've made me so unhappy. And of course, Nazam was keen for people to see that.
Under questioning, Nezem maintains his story, that his wife has fled their marital home.
I think Nazam was keen that video represented that Zubaydah was suffering from some kind of mental health episode or was very desperate, and therefore the fact that she may have gone missing may have come as no surprise.
But analysts find even more interesting activity on Nezem's phone, recorded the day after their violent argument.
On the 28th of March, Nazam, his brother Ramin and his brother Yazin all commenced using 3 new phone numbers that had not previously been used before, which in itself is suspicious. 28th of March is the last time that anybody had ever seen or heard from Zubaydah, and she was never to be seen again.
One of the phones had only been activated for 48 hours and seemed to be a burner phone, and it raised suspicions over why somebody would do that at the same time that Zubaydah went missing.
Detectives now focus on Nezem's brothers and their movements that day.
Rahman and Yasin Salangi lived in Cardiff, but they worked in Caerphilly in a pizza takeaway. The police investigation turned to the pizza takeaway in Caerphilly, and that included examining the CCTV footage of what had been going on in the takeaway. That showed unusual and suspicious behaviour between Rahman and Yasin, both on mobile telephones, on the 28th of March.
Investigators trace calls being made to their brother Nezem, but this is the first time they have spoken to him all year.
CCTV footage revealed that shortly after 10 p.m, Yasin Salangi was seen to reach underneath a counter and retrieve a mobile phone that he handed to Rahman.
And as a result of that phone data inquiries, we could see that on the night of the 28th of March, Ramin actually travelled up from Newport and came to Bromsgrove and met with Nazam.
During questioning, Nezem comes up with an explanation.
He told the police that the reason why Rahman had come from Caerphilly down to Bromsgrove was because a part of the oven in Prego Pizza had broken, and that he had requested his brother to come down with a particular part to replace in the broken oven. In fact, there was nothing wrong with the oven whatsoever. So the police attention turned to Nazam Salangi to see exactly what he had been doing that day.
The 28th of March is really significant because we know on that day that Nazam was expecting a gent to come to the pizza shop. He actually contacted that gent and said, "Don't bother coming, I'm not opening the pizza shop," and gave an excuse along the lines of something was wrong with one of the pizza ovens and therefore business was not going to be conducted as usual. And of course that gent never came.
The police also spoke to one of the chefs who worked at Prego Pizza, and they established from him that in fact Nazam Salangi had cancelled the chef for that day.
Police uncover something else rather sinister about the 28th of March.
Part of the police inquiry revealed that a tenant who had been living up above in a flat in Prego Pizza had been contacted by Nazam Salangi.
We actually traced that individual, and he confirms that Nazam actually called him on the 28th to see when he was coming back into the country. And again, this was really suspicious, taken together with the cancellation of the gent coming up on that day. He clearly wanted no one around to interfere with what he had to do.
Police now suspect this was the day Zubaydah was killed. and Ramin was called upon that evening to help his brother Nezim dispose of the body.
It was key to the investigation to know where Nizam and Ramin have gone during these hours where they're together in and around Bromsgrove. Crucial to those inquiries are CCTV. We knew they were in a white Nissan vehicle. Although you couldn't see the registration number of that vehicle, a similar vehicle was captured on numerous pieces of CCTV from various locations. It basically showed that vehicle travelling out of Bromsgrove towards an area called Lower Bentley. During the early hours of the morning, we were able to calculate that they were probably in or around the area of Lower Bentley for approximately 2.5 to 3 hours for the return journey into Bromsgrove. We had the phone that Nizam was carrying linking to the Wi-Fi at Prego Pizza, so we could time when they got back to that location. A short stop at Prego Pizza before going back out to Lower Bentley. Our hypothesis being that they've gone out to Lower Bentley, prepared an area for deposition disposal, they've come back into Bromsgrove, collected Zubaydah, gone back out to that area and disposed of her body.
But finding Zubaydah's body is a different story. Limited mobile coverage in rural Worcestershire makes it harder to track the suspects' phones.
You are entering a massively rural area. It's huge. Fields, farms, canals, all stretching along the side of the motorway. We were unable to pinpoint exactly where they'd been, so it became a priority to sectorise that vast area and methodically, day by day, put officers through that area on foot with dogs. Huge operation, massively time-consuming.
The police started searching the area. It was noticeable that they were looking out in the countryside, and that spread like wildfire, and people started to question whether actually she'd been buried somewhere.
There were about 20 police, 10 on either side of the lane, with long sticks, were sweeping through the side of the road trying to see if there was anything in there in the hedges. And then the drones, when they came, were up in the opposite direction down there, and they were just searching in the fields all around.
It's really, really frustrating because you know that you are generally in the right area, but you just don't know where exactly you need to be.
Suddenly, there's a breakthrough.
Just off a road called Copy Holt Lane, search officers came across what looked like a grave-shaped marking in the ground in a copse. It was a secluded area of woodland next to a lake. It also looked as if it had been disguised with branches and leaves, and of course they were extremely suspicious.
Investigators seal off the scene.
They'd got a car across the road blocking it off and were putting up, police tape around the area. It was clearly some sort of a crime scene.
To find that grave in our area of interest was highly significant. That's what we were looking for.
The police excavated this area of ground by hand, and they dug down to a natural level of clay.
But unfortunately, Zubaydah wasn't found there.
At this stage, the police were understandably frustrated by the fact that Zubaydah Salangi's body had not been found, despite them having dug what they thought to be her grave. So the task for the police was made more difficult. But with great care and determination, they put together all the evidence that they had to be able to put before the Crown Prosecution Service and a decision be made to charge Nizam Salangi with murder.
You may have convinced the CPS, but you've got to convince a jury beyond all reasonable doubt that he is guilty of that murder.
Bromsgrove takeaway owner Nezim Salangi has been charged with the murder of his missing 28-year-old wife, Zubaydah. But police still haven't found a body.
Just because Nizam had been charged, in some regards, with a no-body murder, the job has only just started.
Investigators home in on the role of Nezam's brother, Ramin.
When Ramin Salangi was arrested and interviewed by police, he initially spun the same tale as his brother did. But when the police confronted him with all the evidence that they had gathered, it was then that he began to tell the police more information. Zubaydah was dead and that she had hung herself.
And they brought the body down from the flat above, Prego Pizza, and put it into the back of Nizam's car.
He indicated the purpose of the trips out to Lower Bentley was to dispose of her body.
That was a real breakthrough moment for the police, because at that point Nizam hadn't said anything about what happened.
As a result of his admission, Ramin Salangi is charged with assisting an offender. But to make their case watertight, police need to find Zubaydah. In August 2020, DCI Mark Peters is brought in to head up the investigation.
My absolute objective was to find Zubaydah. I feel like she almost becomes part of your life. I'd photograph of her on my phone. I would have sleepless nights. Absolutely all-consuming, because we just did not know where she was, and it was totally frustrating. So I decided to go to one of the pre-trial hearings at Worcester Crown Court. And that's the first time I'd seen Nizam and Ramin in the flesh. And I looked at them and I just thought, you two are anything but master criminals. And it just got me thinking, why would you go to the trouble of digging a grave, finding it not fit for purpose, then you'll fill that grave back in and go to the lengths they did to try and disguise it? So I canvassed a number of key individuals within the team. The opinion of the forensic archaeologist was that he was 98% sure from the crime scene photography that we were at the bottom of that grave from the first dig, and that 2% was just too much for me. I want to be 100% sure that we hadn't missed something at that location.
So the police went back and they decided to dig again at the exact spot they had before, at that makeshift grave.
And then went further, about 5 inches.
And lo and behold, having done so, the police found the body of Zubaydah Salangi.
It was such a relief. It was very, very emotional, and it's a day I will never ever forget.
The news spreads throughout Zubaydah's hometown.
When they found her, although it was very emotional, I was glad that they'd found her for her family.
I just couldn't believe it. Shock, really. Just awful, absolutely awful.
I attended the post-mortem. Unfortunately, due to the passage of time that Zubaydah had remained in the grave, we were unable to establish an absolute cause of death. But we can establish very compelling evidence as to what had happened. She was wrapped in household bin bags. She was in a Primark duvet cover, which essentially formed a kind of sack tied with rope. The pillowcase of that duvet set had been located during a previous search at Talbot Road. Her feet were bound with a curtain wire, and when we went back to Talbot Road, there was one window at the front living room that had curtain wire that was absent.
This was a hugely significant find because obviously it gave a direct link from Zubaydah Salangi back to the home of Nazim.
The parting letters supposedly left by Zubaydah are also proven to be fakes.
We were able to prove, with the use of a handwriting expert, that in fact there is no way she could have written those letters.
This was a case that was filled with pieces of circumstantial evidence, and like a puzzle, those pieces in isolation didn't appear to be anything substantial, but when they were put together, it was very clear indeed to see the involvement of Nizam Salangi in the murder of Zubaydah.
"18 months after finding Zubaydah's body, her husband Nazim finally faces justice. He pleads not guilty to murder, and his brothers Ramin and Yasin plead not guilty to charges of assisting an offender.
I went to court and I testified. I felt like I had to be that voice for Zubaydah. Nizam had got his feet up. He didn't look bothered at all. He was just staring straight at me. I tried to avoid eye contact, but on the occasion that I looked at him, he was just smirking. And he didn't look regretful at all. The defence was quite gruelling. They tried to say that Zubaydah did in fact have a black eye, but that was years ago. And I said, no, it was 6 weeks before she went missing. So I just basically stood my ground. I had to be strong. I wanted to make sure she was not forgotten.
The prosecution reveals how the violent row captured on Nazim's smartphone the day before Zubaydah went missing was to be their last.
That night after he went to the pizza parlour, that she went on Facebook and unfriended him and his brothers and was searching for cleaning jobs.
To stop his wife from leaving him, Nazim decides on murder.
During the court case, the web of lies that Nizam had put together was completely unravelled. The prosecution showed that a lot of what he'd said just wasn't true, and piece by piece, it showed that he was just a heartless killer.
After a 7-week trial, the jury retires.
When the guilty verdicts came in, it was a feeling of huge relief.
Upon being found guilty, he became very vocal towards the officers in the case, essentially alleging that we fabricated evidence to stitch him up.
I think he thought he was going to get away with it. I felt glad that he's got what he deserves.
Nazim Salangi is jailed for a minimum of 18 years. Ramin Salangi sentenced to 6 years, and his brother Yasin for 4 years and 9 months.
Of course, it's the verdict we wanted, but it doesn't bring Zubaydah back.
The murder has also left its mark on Bromsgrove.
Even now, there's still times when people think about it, especially going past there in that precinct, and just to think that they had a killer in their community.
If I could speak to Zubaydah now, I think I'd rather go back in the past. Said, look, come with me. I'll take you somewhere, anywhere away from him. Because then she'd still be here. But I hope she's out there somewhere and she knows that I've done something for her.
A vibrant young woman making a fresh start in life.
My sister had a great sense of humor. She was just full of life and ideas and fun. She had a new graphic design job, a new relationship, a new place to live. She was looking to a new future.
Is mercilessly slaughtered in her home.
The person slit her throat.
It was a shocking murder.
Whomever the attacker was extremely disturbed.
You just can't register it. She didn't have any enemies. Everyone loved her.
Investigators tracked down multiple suspects.
There was a creepy guy just watching her.
There was a note that said, saw no signs of life.
Then police discover an enemy in disguise.
They were using other individuals to try to throw us off.
It was a bombshell.
Detectives unmask a killer no one could have imagined.
And I said, what? It didn't make any sense to me.
I was in complete shock.
Gulfport, Florida is an idyllic community, complete with sun, sand, and seaside charm.
Gulfport is kind of a classic southern town. It's kind of an arty community now.
Gulfport has a beautiful beach, and people are very friendly. I never felt unsafe living there.
On May 24th, 1984, Gulfport's laid-back lifestyle is shattered when a disturbing discovery is made.
A woman was checking on her neighbor, and when she didn't answer the door, she viewed inside one of the windows and saw a body laying in a pool of blood. And that's when she called 911.
Homicide detectives are sent to the address in Waterview Park.
Entering into the residence, I noticed broken glass, and I saw the victim's body. There was a copious amount of blood pooling around her head. She looked like she had been hit with a blunt object. There were several stab wounds up and around her neck area, like it was an attack of rage. The victim was partially clothed in a black teddy over a white t-shirt.
It was kind of unusual for someone to wear a teddy on top of their t-shirt. It was unsnapped at the crotch, and so I had suspicions that she was sexually assaulted.
Even though the area was so gory, she had no blood on the soles of her feet. And that was important because you could see bloody footprints, and it appeared to be a barefoot as well.
We surmised that the perpetrator stepped in the blood after the attack was over.
The scene is so bloody, it's not yet clear what exactly happened. The body is sent for autopsy while detectives continue surveying the home.
There was blood on the bed, blood smears on the drapes, and blood on the windowsill.
Possibly the attack started in the bedroom area and then traversed over into the living room.
The trail of blood would indicate that she was fighting throughout. I think she was able to get away from her assailant and run through the house and open the door.
There was some blood and hair on the door, and it looks as though she was stopped, drugged back in, and then finished.
Upon examination of the residence, we couldn't find any type of weapon.
The crime scene was indicative of a very involved struggle, yet there was nothing knocked over or in disarray in the house. Now, it's possible that could actually happen that way, but it's also possible somebody went back in and cleaned it up.
Police speak with the woman who found the body. She tells them the victim is her neighbor, Karen Gregory.
She said the victim's boyfriend, David, was at a conference in Providence, Rhode Island. David had not heard from Karen, and so he called and asked if she would check to see if Karen was okay.
Born in Albany, New York in 1948, 36-year-old Karen Gregory was a loving and kind free spirit.
She was the center of attraction at any gathering, and people just loved her. Karen had a great sense of humor. She was a really good artist, had a great eye. She was a smart woman and very clever and witty and talented.
Karen loved to seek out new places and was always up for an adventure.
She traveled a lot. She would go to Jamaica and explore. And I think her ultimate goal was to go to Jamaica and teach art.
Before Karen can make her dream move, A chance meeting in Florida changes her plans.
And then she met David. David was an interesting character and probably a match for my sister's wit. He was very clever, very intelligent. David was a therapist for PTSD Vietnam vets, and they were just a really good match for each other. They were probably almost a year into the relationship where she had been visiting enough and staying there enough that it was time for her to move in with him. This was a new beginning. She had a new graphic design job, a new relationship, a new place to live, and I think she was looking to a new future. She had just moved in with David the day she was killed.
Who would take away Karen's life in such a horrific manner, and why? Detectives hope clues at the scene will point them to the killer.
Well, we found the Village Voice publication from Providence that struck us as really strange because David was supposed to be up there at the time.
That newspaper actually was dated the day that Karen could have been murdered.
Was David really in Providence, or had he returned? Before detectives can contact David to question him, they find another lead outside.
A note was placed on the car. The context of the note itself was quite telling.
It says, "Came by, I have something for you," but there was no sign of life. Rather brief note. But obviously, the no sign of life would, send up a red flag.
The note is signed by someone named Peter, but there's no other information, so police have no way to track him down. Officers collect the note as evidence, as Karen's family is notified of her death.
The day I got the call was just a beautiful, warm day. This isn't the kind of day that these things happen on. They had found my sister murdered. And I said, what? It didn't make any sense to me. And my mind just went through all of these situations to make that call impossible. And everything will be okay.
Police ask Karen's brother, Roy, about her relationship with David.
Karen's brother indicated that there was a little conflict between Karen and David in that Karen may have had an interest in another individual.
In Jamaica, she met a guy, and then she'd stay longer and longer on these trips. I think she was kind of torn maybe between both realities and both futures.
We also found out that Karen and David had broken up for a length of time before her death.
It wasn't some huge breakup, and she was still moving in, so we assumed everything was going to be worked out. But the weekend she was moving in is the weekend she was killed. The murder was at David's house, and I knew there was a rift there. So I think that added to maybe, well, you just never know.
Could he have flown out to Providence and rebooked a flight back to Gulfport, committed the homicide, and then jumped back on a plane? We have to track down David. We felt that something was there behind the scenes, and we needed to find out about it.
Coming up, investigators discover a series of suspicious men in Karen's circle.
He had been physically abusive to his first wife.
He made Karen feel very uncomfortable.
And scramble to separate friend from foe.
Here we are building on a story that really raised red flags for us.
He's either protecting somebody or he's just flat out lying.
Until finally, the awful truth is revealed.
It makes me sick to my stomach.
No one would have ever thought that this person murdered this woman.
A day after 36-year-old Karen Gregory was brutally murdered in her home, police in Gulfport, Florida suspect her boyfriend, David Mackey, could have killed her, and they need to track him down.
Detectives found out that David was in Albany and that he had flew there to be with the family for the wake and funeral of Karen.
David Mackey seemed to be concerned about Karen, and he wanted to know what was going on. We weren't going to give David the investigative information that we had.
He said that he wasn't going to be back in Florida for another 2 weeks.
David promises to come down to the station when he is back in town. In the interim, investigators sent officers to canvass Karen's street.
Many of the neighbors heard a scream that night. Many got up and looked outside their windows and saw nothing. They didn't know exactly where it came from. Was it kids in a car? I mean, they didn't really know.
The time of the scream was around 1 o'clock in the morning.
There's some thought the time of death was during the scream. She wasn't discovered until midday the day after that.
The head of the neighborhood watch is one of Karen's closest neighbors and a familiar face detectives can rely on.
George Lewis was a Gulfport firefighter, had grown up in Gulfport. All the police officers knew him.
George and his wife, Linda, were very good friends with Detective Larry Tossi.
Well, having somebody like George to depend on was very, very comforting in that if something was going on in the neighborhood, he just was that kind of neighborhood watch guy. George said that he was working in his garage, which was across the street from the murder scene. He said he heard a faint scream. He had the radio up loud. He even went out in the street, didn't see anything.
But George did see something the day before Karen's body was found.
George Lewis described seeing this guy pull up in his car and walk up to the door and then write a note and put it on the windshield of one of the cars.
Did George see Peter, the man who wrote that note?
He didn't know Peter Clutt. It was certainly something that the police wanted to look into because that was the only person they were aware of that went to the house during that time frame.
The next day, as police are figuring out how to track down Peter, they catch a lucky break.
In order to release the remains of the body, Karen's old roommate was asked to identify the victim. And at that time, she brought another person with her.
And he identified himself. It was Peter Cumble.
Investigators bring Peter in to answer some questions.
I noticed the scratch on his hand, thinking, maybe it was done by Karen. He noticed me looking at it, so he moved his hand.
They asked him about that, and he said that his dog did it.
Peter confirms to detectives he is the one who left the note for Karen and says he was at the house around 7:30 p.m.
He had been invited to dinner by Karen. They'd known each other for maybe a year. They were both reggae music fans. He was bringing back a music tape, and that's what he was referring to when he said, "I have something of yours."
Not having anybody respond to the knock on the door, he just left the note and left. During the interview, he didn't seem very upset. Portraying that he was such a close friend to Karen, it kind of struck me as being, strange.
Detectives ask where Peter was when Karen was murdered.
Cumble's explanation for where he was that night was he was at home.
He did indicate that his roommate could verify that. He answered the questions, and he was amenable to whatever I asked him to do.
Peter provides police with his fingerprints and footprints, and while they let him go, detectives will keep an eye on him.
We weren't eliminating Peter Cumble from the investigation.
3 days after the murder, police received the medical examiner's report.
Karen had dozens of stab wounds on her. And it wasn't until they had cleaned her up they realized that the person slit her throat. Karen was tortured. The time of death was a day and a half before her body was discovered.
The report also confirms another disturbing fact.
The autopsy determined that a rape was involved.
The medical examiner found semen, but it wasn't enough to make comparison. And DNA at that time was in its infancy.
Thinking about what she went through, it makes me sick to my stomach. You just can't register it. She didn't have any enemies. Everyone loved her.
After 2 weeks out of state, Karen's boyfriend David returns to Florida and is immediately interviewed by detectives.
David was still very upset. He said he loved her and they were getting serious with each other, and that she had finally found what she was looking for in life.
When detectives reveal they know he and Karen had issues, David brushes it off.
He repeated it was all good. They were in love with each other.
David claims the last time he saw Karen was the day he flew out of state.
Karen had driven David to the airport because he had a conference to attend in Providence.
Skeptical, detectives tell David they can place him back at the crime scene.
And I said, we found the Village Voice publication from Providence.
It was dated the night of the murder here in Gulfport.
He indicated to us he had purchased the Providence publication to check on the weather before he had left.
He told us it was at the newsstand in Gulfport a couple of days prior to the homicide. We have to look into that.
Detectives asked David point blank if he murdered his girlfriend.
He became frustrated, in my opinion, that we'd be looking at him instead of spending time looking for the real killer.
He was pretty adamant in the fact that he was off doing a conference in Providence and he hadn't gone anywhere. He said, I want to be as much of a help rather than a hindrance as I can. He was also asked to submit foot samples, which he did as well.
When asked who might want to kill his girlfriend, David gives a name detectives recognize.
David informed us that he felt that Peter Cumble had some kind of an interest in Karen.
It became clear that David was trying to blame this on Peter Cumble.
Police are investigating the grisly murder of Karen Gregory. Her boyfriend, David Mackey, denies being involved and points detectives towards Peter Cumble, a man police have already questioned and released.
In David's mind, he felt that Cumble was someone who had an interest in Karen, like as a potential girlfriend. David wasn't aware of anything about Cumble being invited to dinner and really probably had no real reason to see why Cumble would come by the house while he was gone. He said that Cumble was an acquaintance, but not a close friend. They knew people in the same circles.
Peter Cumble was always calling Karen up and that he felt he was going to try to develop a relationship with her, and Karen obviously wouldn't have anything to do with it.
David was concerned that Cumble could be involved, and they needed to look at him closely.
With nothing concrete to link David to the murder, they let him go. Detectives now need to confirm his claim that Peter had ulterior motives around Karen. When police try to bring Peter in for another interview, they hit a problem.
He had left Gulfport right after his first interview.
He had went on vacation, and the detectives found that strange that him being close to Karen Gregory, that he would leave and go on vacation after her death.
Without the evidence to compel Peter to return, investigators switch gears and delve deeper into David Mackey's alibi. David had told police he had given a presentation in Providence at 9 a.m. on May 23rd, which would have been 8 hours after Karen was killed.
Was it possible for him to have got on a flight, come down, murdered Karen, and got back up to Rhode Island?
Detective Sergeant Tossi decided to take flights in the same time frame.
I found that he could have committed the murder and get back in time and do his presentation. It would have been tight, but it's possible.
Detectives subpoena David's credit card information, but they show no record of David buying any additional flights. David's story about the newspaper also appears to check out.
It was discovered that the paper actually comes out 2 days early, and the gentleman remembered selling the paper to David Mackey. David was telling the truth, and his alibi was solid.
As weeks pass without an arrest, Karen's friends and family become concerned.
Not knowing why or who or how this even happened, you're left with all these questions. The grief was too heavy. There was just a lot of weeping for a long time. Just the slightest little memory of her or thought of her, I can weep right now thinking about that.
For such a small town, it was a shocking murder. I can only imagine what some of the women that lived alone in that community felt when there is a killer out there and they haven't been caught.
A few weeks into the investigation, detectives get a boost when potential suspect Peter Cumble arrives back in town.
He looked a little bit disheveled, he looked a little bit shaky, as if he didn't want to be there type of an attitude.
Detectives cut to the chase and ask Peter if he killed Karen Gregory.
He was completely shocked.
Cumble's alibi was he was at home.
But with David pointing the finger at Peter, detectives need to follow up.
He was pretty adamant in the fact that, you know, he hadn't gone anywhere and the roommate could be his alibi witness. Anybody can say they're home and they're in bed. In the middle of the night, they can go out and do what they want to do. And that's a very shaky and unsubstantiated alibi. We didn't have much to hold him at that point, so he left.
Needing something concrete to tie Peter to the murder, investigators hope his footprint sample matches the one found at the scene.
There was a partial bloody footprint on the floor. We did send it off to the sheriff's office, and we waited quite a period of time, and then we heard back that they couldn't find any identifying ridges or swirls.
It's a big disappointment to me that our sheriff's office couldn't make a match.
Detectives refuse to give up.
The photograph of the bloody footprint looks mostly like a smear. So it was sent to Washington for the FBI to look at, which was not uncommon practice, especially if you had something that might be difficult for a local person to do.
The analysis won't be fast, so investigators go back through everything collected at the scene and find a potential piece of evidence.
There was a schematic drawing of a clock.
It appeared to have a blood stain on it. Did the murderer bring that with him and leave that there, forgetting about it? Did he get blood on it while this happened? So it looked like a pretty good clue they needed to follow up on. They were able to determine that these were schematics that had been drawn by Stephen Fischler, who was someone that Karen worked with.
Detectives send the blood on the drawing in for testing, and when they look into Stephen Fischler, they discover something troubling.
We found out from female workers that they felt uncomfortable around him, that he showed the girls pornography, and they took offense.
They indicated they were afraid of him.
According to one friend, Stephen Fischler made Karen feel very uncomfortable many times. He made unwanted advances. At one time, he gave her a provocative novel that he was writing.
Fischler, as far as the way he behaved in the office around women, he was a suspect.
We decided that we needed to have an extensive interview with Stephen Fischler. Stephen Fischler had kind of a defensive attitude. He was curt.
He said that they didn't really know each other. He and Karen had seen each other at work, but she had only been working there a short period of time.
When Stephen was questioned about the schematic, he had no explanation for how it got into her house, other than she probably took it home with her.
Detectives grill Stephen about his reputation among his coworkers.
And he became angry. He says, I had no idea.
We asked him if we'd take a polygraph test. He agreed to do that. Stephen didn't really want to answer the questions. He was extremely frustrated.
Just when investigators think they won't get anything out of him, Stephen says something truly shocking.
During the polygraph, he blurted out, "Okay, I did it."
Everybody thought, well, heck, this guy is confessing.
Two months after Karen Gregory is viciously slaughtered in her home, her coworker Stephen Fischler has just confessed to police.
It was unexpected. Was he really telling the truth?
Police immediately begin to press Stephen for details behind his confession.
We determined that after talking with Stephen, that he blurted out, "Okay, I did it," just out of frustration.
He was angry because he was being accused of this murder. And that was just his personality and his temperament.
Stephen retracts his confession and proceeds with the polygraph.
He passed the polygraph. It showed no deception indicated.
The result was totally unexpected to us. It basically cleared Fischler.
But Stephen's not off the suspect list just yet. He refuses to provide a footprint sample, so police must wait for the results from the schematic drawing to see if any foreign blood is detected.
In this case, the blood was clearly all her blood, and it wasn't Stephen Fischler's. There was a lot of frustration. They'd kind of hit a dead end.
Running out of suspects, investigators switch up their approach and put together a behavioral analysis profile of the killer.
You're trying to look at, you know, what causes people to do what they might do.
It wasn't your general whodunit. Whomever the attacker was extremely disturbed. He was the type of individual that had various fantasies, sexual fantasies, which drove him to commit the murder of Karen Gregory.
Maybe this was a serial killer, which kind of fits into that whole psychological pattern to some degree.
It was probably the most difficult case that I had to deal with. 5 months down the road from the homicide, I just couldn't let the case go, couldn't put it on a shelf.
For Karen's family, coping with the reality that her killer may never be found is overwhelming.
We kind of thought like, you know, they're never going to solve this, which was just alarming to us. And that's another whole kind of pain that was a nightmare. She was a sweet, wonderful young woman. And the killer was a brute, you know, who butchered her.
Finally, a break comes in December, 5 months after the murder, when detectives make a discovery that revitalizes the case.
Tassi was talking to a person who lived a few blocks away from Karen, and that person told him they had heard the scream. She described it as just a wail, and that it was very disturbing. Tassi was like, he didn't realize it was really that loud that actually over 2 or 3 blocks people heard this.
This new information is in direct conflict with the statements of the neighborhood watchhead.
She's several blocks away and she hears the scream, and George is right across the street. How come he didn't hear more than what he said was a faint scream? It didn't make any sense. So we figured we better have another talk with George, which we did.
Detective Tassi, he looked at George as a helper to the police case. George was a firefighter, the neighborhood watch guy that was actively out there.
When we went over his story, he indicated that he had heard the scream, that he walked to the edge of his driveway, looked around and didn't see anything.
Now, George adds a new detail to his account.
Now he sees somebody on the lawn under the big oak tree.
The story was quite a surprise. Why didn't he report it? Why didn't he call it?
He didn't really know what to say. I think in many ways he sounded nervous.
George describes the person he saw the night of the murder.
He said he was like 6'4" and had red sandy hair. He was a big, strong-looking guy. It was certainly something that the police wanted to look into.
Armed with the new information, detectives try to track down this mysterious man.
And in doing extensive neighborhood interviews, it was related to us there may be a peeping Tom in the area that fit. We thought, well, we may have something to go on here.
I interviewed one person, and she said that she had a peeping Tom at her window. And when she noticed him, he took off.
Could the peeping Tom be the killer police have been looking for? Investigators show George pictures of possible prowlers.
He couldn't identify any of them. So the mystery man in the lawn remained unidentified.
So there's some thought that he might have been watching that house and watching her and knew that she was alone that night, knew David was out of town.
I felt terrified, especially at night. I kept my doors locked. I didn't want to end up like her.
Detectives find another woman in the neighborhood who recently saw the prowler.
There was a creepy guy just watching her for some unknown reason.
She caught him peeping in the window, and he took off.
The woman recognized the man. When she tells police his name, they're stunned.
It was a big surprise.
Detectives hunting for Karen Gregory's killer learn there's a prowler stalking the women of Gulfport, Florida. Could the offender be one and the same? When a victim of the voyeur comes forward with a name, investigators are shocked.
It's the neighbor, George Lewis.
It was totally unexpected to us.
Detectives bring George in for a third time and ask him about the woman's claims.
He admitted he was outside the house, and he had some explanation for why he was there. He was a neighborhood watch guy and always looking out for people. He said he heard a noise or something. He thought, you know, is it possible it's the killer?
He was given the opportunity to take a polygraph test, which he did.
Detectives start by asking about the prowler.
Listening to the polygraph tape and how George Lewis described the man, I really believed him.
Investigators also ask him about the night of the murder.
Did you kill Karen Gregory? George said no.
The polygraph results tell a different story.
The results were disastrous. He failed it miserably.
After he failed it, he had something else to say about the night of the murder.
George admits he hasn't been completely honest and tells police that's why he didn't pass the polygraph.
George Lewis indicated to us the individual that he saw on the lawn left Karen's house itself. He saw George and had approached him and threatened him.
The person walks out and tells him, if you say you saw me here, I'll come back and kill you.
So that's the reason he wasn't forthcoming. He was afraid of him. George Lewis went from just hearing a scream at the edge of his driveway to indicating that he saw the perpetrator.
And then his next story, George said this guy threatened him.
We were very concerned about that because here we are building on a story, so it really raised red flags for us. We felt that, you know, with the abundance of different issues and stories he was telling, he was using other individuals to try to throw us off. We had asked him to do a composite sketch of the individual that he saw. After the sketch was done, we both looked at each other and said, this really can't be happening. We both came to the conclusion it was George when he was younger.
I think he thought the police had a witness who saw somebody in Karen's yard. So he was making this description of the person who scared him get closer and closer to looking like him.
He's either protecting somebody that he knows, or he's just flat out lying. We have to look at George a little closer.
Investigators collect his foot and fingerprints, but with little hard evidence to hold him, George is released. Detectives take a deep dive into George's past and make some disturbing discoveries.
He had been physically abusive to his first wife.
According to her, there were times when he had been violent with her. He had choked her. The crime itself shows some pretty deep-seated violence towards women, and I think there was aspects in his background where you could see that.
George had gotten into a swingers club. That was a part of George I never really saw, you know, or never knew. He's never said anything like that to me. So that was kind of surprising, but things were building up with him and his behavior.
It appears George developed a troubling fascination with Karen before she had even moved in.
One of George's friends told me that Karen was visiting over at David's house. Karen had come out in a bikini, and he made some comment about liking to have an orgy with her. Got aroused. He had gotten into sexual perversions, if you will.
I think there was indications that he was, you know, a peeper of some sort.
Still looking for hard proof, Detectives asked George's wife about the night of the murder.
She was woken by the scream. After just a few minutes, George came in from the garage.
The killer would have been covered in blood, but George wasn't.
When you sit back and you look at these things, because you say to yourself, oh, well, maybe he really didn't do it. Maybe his story makes sense. Or maybe he's covering up for somebody that did do it, you know what I mean?
And so now it's, you know, where do we go from here?
At that time, we didn't have, DNA. The only thing that could tie itself into the case was the footprints.
Detectives are still waiting for those results.
It was getting extremely, extremely frustrating for the team.
And then the months just went by, you know, nothing happened.
It seemed like it was just going to be a cold case. And it's like, well, what are we supposed to do with that? You know, you can't just stop here, but they didn't have leads. They didn't know where to go with it. This is about my sister being butchered to death. We were not going to rest till they found who the killer was.
In March 1986, almost 2 years after Karen's murder, the FBI finally finished their analysis on the bloody footprint at the crime scene.
The day that the data came back from the FBI, everybody was elated.
They showed the ridges on the heel from the bare foot, and they can be identified, compare one to someone else.
Detectives have renewed hope the killer is within their reach.
We must have sent 20 sets of footprints.
And they got a result on that relatively quick, which changed the whole case.
A definite match.
No one in Gulfport would have ever thought that this person murdered this woman.
Nearly 2 years since the brutal slaying of Karen Gregory, detectives have just received a report back on the bloody footprint found at the crime scene.
The footprint was sent to the FBI. We were waiting specifically on just that result.
There was a definite match of a footprint of George Lewis to the inked footprint that we had sent up there to the FBI lab.
It was shocking.
It was very hard for me to believe that George Lewis murdered Karen Gregory. He was the head of the crime watch. He was a firefighter. I was in complete shock.
Although no one could believe George was a cold-blooded killer, the evidence doesn't lie.
Footprints with their ridges and their swirls are similar to fingerprints. If you have enough of those patterns to present to a match, then they're just as good.
I didn't want to believe it, and I had to face that. I trusted George. He was toying with me. He certainly wasn't the person that I thought he was.
The detective knows he has to ask his old friend some tough questions.
We asked him to come into the station, and that's when we confronted him with the footprint. That's when he said, I crawled in the window.
It was a bombshell. Now here's a whole new story where he's absolutely in the house.
He indicated that he had heard the scream. He had gone through the bedroom window to try to assist Karen.
He said that he saw her laying there with her throat cut open. Only the killer would have known that her throat was cut.
He said he had stepped in the blood to assist her or help her, and then he had exited out through the bedroom window.
His explanations didn't make sense. If you assume that his story is true, that he was threatened by this person in the yard and was too scared to do anything about it, then why would he go into the house?
Why didn't he call police at that time?
His story is BS. But the nail in the coffin, of course, was the footprint.
Investigators also talked to George's wife again, and they learned he would have had time to clean up after the crime.
His wife had been very defensive of him, but she changed the story. George was gone for the longest time, she said, 20 minutes or more.
We don't have to prove motive. We felt we had enough probable cause then to make an arrest.
I had mixed feelings. I was sorry it was George, but yet I was a little upset that he just let us on.
Nearly 2 years after Karen's brutal murder, on March 15th, 1986, George is charged with first-degree murder and sexual battery.
It was a huge relief that they had finally found someone, but it was a shock, just a shock, and still no reason why would a neighbor do this.
I think in looking at him, it was pretty clear that he had a fairly misogynistic view towards women. He thought she might be an easy mark or an easy target.
At trial, investigators put forward their theory about how the murder unfolded.
George Lewis would have gone over knowing that David was out of town. He came in the house, knifed, and ready to do it, and was living out a fantasy. Teddy had been put on her against her will.
She knew that the only way to get away was fight to get out of that residence.
She was pushed and hit her head against the jalousie windows. That's when she screamed. After that, it got really violent. The rape was involved.
Lewis knew then that he had only one way to go with this, and as a result, he ends up stabbing Karen 21 times.
George Lewis maintains his innocence, but a jury convicts him, and he is sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
No one ever really wants to believe that someone that is there to protect and to serve could do something so horrible.
This was really unexpected that he was the killer. That didn't seem like who I would expect a firefighter to be, and certainly not the neighborhood watch guy. Although maybe he was watching for opportunities.
I was relieved we could actually get justice for Karen and all the people who loved her.
There was a little bit of justice in knowing he was in jail. My sister probably would have forgiven him. That's the kind of person she was. It's funny sitting here now. She was alive for as many years as she's now been gone. She never lived, we never got to know who she'd be as an old lady. She was just full of life and ideas and fun and humor. I have her ring on right now that she made for me. Karen and I were really close. And I'll always miss that. And I'll just never forget her.
Good morning, Surrey Police Contact Centre. How can I help you?
A strange thing happened to me this morning. I went for a walk and got attacked.
So I remember the night very clearly of when it happened. There's forensics down the road. Like, something serious has happened now, like what?
No issues with anything, with anybody or anything that could be related, no?
No, last year I had an issue with my partner, but that all sorted and we're friends again.
A very significant head injury that had been suffered. It had been caused by someone, and this became a murder investigation.
This murder was one of the most brutal that I have seen within 20 years.
You never think it's going to happen on your own doorstep. There's some evil people about.
It was almost Shakespearean in terms of the motivation, the jealousy, and what that can do.
On the eastern side of the River Blackwater in Surrey lies the small village of Ash.
It sort of sits in between Aldershot in Hampshire and Guildford. Ash is fairly typical of a lot of places in Surrey in that you will find lots of different communities within a community. From a policing perspective, not a lot happens.
They're a very close-knit community around here. Everyone knows everyone.
At the heart of the community lives 59-year-old Joy Bolton.
She was really a lovable and special person. She did have a big circle of friends because she used to work in Potter's music shop, and then she left there due to illness.
She'd always say hello or wave at the window if she was in the house. She was very much always quite happy and never seemed to say a bad word about anyone.
Auntie Joy was a little naughty auntie, if I can say she's a little naughty auntie, in the way of that she was one of those that turned up unannounced, which was quite funny. And she'd turn up, I'm not staying long, and her not staying long would always turn into at least a couple of hours.
In 2021, Joy started dating local man Trevor Dibner. They had known each other for 18 years.
Trevor Dibner is somebody, again, who has spent his life working. Trevor had a number of businesses and was known locally as a taxi driver. He's also a mechanic and latterly had started working for Ford, where he was doing MOTs. He was somebody who had an interest in motorsport, and he collected model buses, which you know was a passion of his.
I knew him in my teenage years when he would be driving the minibuses, and we would hire minibuses from him to do runs to girls' nights out, if I was out with the girls, or if we were going to the Ascot races with our partners, he'd take us there.
They used to go and see a stock car, go and watch stock car. They also used to go to these old bus fairs and everything. And I think it was just a little bit of an attraction.
In October 2022, the couple moved in together and their relationship flourished.
Trevor and Joy became engaged at Sandown Racecourse on the 4th of December, and Trevor announced it, as we do these days, on Facebook to tell friends, contacts that he and Joy had become engaged. Joy was at a time in her life where things were starting to go right. She had things to look forward to, and things were going well for her.
But life for the happy couple is about to change.
I received a call very late on the 11th of May from the on-call crime scene manager who was in attendance at Churchview in Ash. He'd responded to reports of a suspicious death.
On the 11th of May, Trevor had gone to work and spent the day at work. He'd been unable to get hold of Joy throughout the day, and then he came back to his home address and found Joy was lying on the floor, not moving. He called the ambulance service to report this. At first, it wasn't clear to the officers who were there whether or not this was a case where somebody else had been involved. There was the potential. Joy was quite vulnerable and unstable on her feet. She could have fallen.
Within the small community, news begins to spread of a police presence at Joy's house.
I heard from my eldest grandson. I said, what's the matter? Come on. He said, it's Joy. I said, oh no, she's not in hospital again, is she? Just like that. And he said, no, it's worse than that, Nan. I said, what do you mean it's worse than that?
So I remember the night very clearly of when it happened. There's forensics down the road. They're pulling the sofas outside the house. There's a carpet outside the house. Like, they're bringing everything out. They're all in hazmat suits, everything. And I was like, shit, like something serious has happened now, like what?
Phone rang, and it was my sister-in-law. And she said, have you heard? I went, oh, what's happened? She said, about your auntie. I went, auntie who? Your Auntie Joy. I went, what do you mean? And she said, she's been beaten up. And I put the phone down, and my hands were so clammy, I looked at my partner, I was sat beside him, and I went, you need to take me to my Auntie Joyce, please, now.
And it was raining, it was cold. Got up there, the police cars were there. It was cornered off from round the corner, tape, and the police were standing outside. We parked up, and I went across to the policeman, and I said, and he said, who are you? I said, I'm Joy's eldest sister. I said, can you please tell me what's happened to her? He said, I can't at the moment. I said, please tell me, is she alive or is she dead? I said, tell me. I've got to know. So he said, well, I'm ever so sorry. I said, don't say any more.
It was quite quickly then all over social media. Something's happened in Church View, the police are all there. Doesn't really happen, especially in a quiet community like this.
The policeman stood there, guarding the door, another policeman inside. Everybody gathered around, lined my auntie's pathway. And I said to the officer, excuse me, can you tell me please what's going on? And as he was talking, as the officer was talking to us, I happened to look down a bit to my auntie's doormat. I saw my auntie's foot, just a big pool of blood. About I did a police size. But her foot was buckled back like as if she'd been crawling, trying to get into the front room. Fighting for her life.
Surrey detectives are at the scene of a suspected assault, which has left local woman Joy Bolton dead. Her fiancé, Trevor Dibner, has called emergency services after returning home from work to find her motionless on the floor.
The injuries that Joy sustained were amongst the worst head injuries that I've ever observed. It was very clear that there was no other mechanism than a repeated assault that could have caused them. That repeated assault had been committed by somebody.
As the police begin their investigation, Joy's family remain outside her home, waiting for information. Joy's fiancé is still on the scene. He's the only one who can tell them anything.
I was sitting in the back of my eldest grandson's car, and Joy's partner come over. I said, tell me what's happened. And he said, well, I come home about 20 to 6 tonight and had to push my way through the front door. And there she was laying there. He said, but I tried ringing her between 10 and 10:30 like I normally do. And he couldn't get an answer. I said, well, why didn't you go home and check on her?
While detectives launch a murder inquiry, their colleagues are looking into reports of another attack on a female, just a few streets from Joy's house.
Yeah, I went for a walk this morning and this woman come up to me, asked me if I was Sarah. I said yes. The next thing, she's pulling my hair out, grabbed my carrier bag, which had my raincoat in it, and grabbed my glasses off me. I don't know if she threw them away because I couldn't find them.
Okay.
And ran off.
Okay, so just she literally just said, are you Sarah?
The woman is alleged to have pulled her hair and scratched her, as well as taking a carrier bag that she had with her, which she said had her coat and glasses in.
She said, no, she grabbed my hair and said that'll come in handy, because she took a chunk of hair.
You don't know the lady at all?
Not a clue, not a clue.
But she knew your name?
Yeah, she said stay away as well.
She stated that she had been approached by a woman who was unknown to her, described her as late 40s, early 50s, dark glasses, long black coat, hood up, carrying a plastic bag.
It just seems strange that she said that will come in handy, my chunk of hair.
Yeah.
That's what my daughter said. She said, I don't like that. Mum, what's she going to use your hair for?
The woman had walked away from her assault, suffering only minor injuries. Officers take the details of the woman and are surprised to discover she is Sarah Mackenzie, Trevor Dibner's ex.
Sarah Mackenzie also lived in Ash. She'd previously been in a relationship with Trevor, and they'd lived together for a number of years until Trevor made the decision that he would leave Sarah to be with Joy.
Police now need to look into the fact Trevor's fiancée and his former partner have been attacked on the same day.
It's unusual, and it's a coincidence given what had happened to Joy. So forensic strategies and search strategies were put in place to investigate the robbery of Sarah Mackenzie just as much as the homicide of Joy Bolton.
Sarah phoned Trevor straight away and told him that she was attacked. Sarah described the person as 40-odd-year-old jogging towards her, ripped her glasses off her face.
Trevor agreed to go round to Sarah's house on his way home, which was something that he would often do, and had continued to do even after leaving Sarah for Joy. Trevor said that he spent a few minutes there, made sure that Sarah was okay before going back to his home.
Detectives are suspicious of Trevor's behaviour. He's told them he had spent all day at work worrying about Joy because he couldn't get hold of her. Now they discover he hadn't gone straight home.
There were a couple of things about what had gone on that weren't or didn't seem quite right. First, he had a concern for Joy, who he's very clear about it was the love of his life, and he didn't go home and see that she was okay. And second, that on his way home, in spite of being worried about Joy and worried that she may have fallen, he did go and check that Sarah was okay in relation to the robbery.
Despite their relationship being over, Trevor maintained a friendship with his former partner.
She used to text before he even left for work. He used to read her messages, then text her back to say that he'd be going round there.
Trevor and Sarah were together for 13 years in what seems to be a tumultuous relationship by all accounts, even from Sarah herself.
She was a jealous woman, and she did go round to Joy's place and said to him, what she got, what I haven't got. And apparently he said, you haven't got a patch on, Joy.
After hearing about Joy's death from Trevor himself, Sarah immediately makes her way to their home.
She'd come to the scene, apparently to offer some support to Trevor. Her actions at the scene went beyond what you would expect a normal bystander to do, so she tried to get into the address to see what had happened and had to be stopped by one of our colleagues from the ambulance service stopping her getting in.
Here's his ex-partner. She's just come, give him support, but also something happened to her today that may be related. So that'd be great for DNA.
So I've got a reference number. Yeah, she pulled my hair, and as you can see, I got scratched. And she said, "Yeah, I can use that later." So with this happening, makes me wonder if she wanted DNA, hair, scratched, and now somebody doesn't like him, obviously.
Yeah. Hi, chap. You okay? Yeah. I'm very sorry. Yeah, very sorry. What's happened today?
She started to tell people that she'd been the victim of a robbery, and that it had happened about 200 yards or so away from the address that we were at. And she made the connection that it was likely to be about Trevor, and she used the phrase along the lines of, "Isn't it strange that Trevor's two ladies have been attacked on the same day?"
The potentially linked attacks raise suspicions at the scene, and police make a decision.
Trevor was initially arrested and nominated as a suspect in relation to the murder of Joy.
But that wasn't all.
It started to be suspected that Sarah Mackenzie knew something about what had happened, and a decision was made that she would be arrested for murder.
Detectives in Surrey have two suspects in custody for the murder of 59-year-old Joy Bolton.
We knew that somebody was arrested. First of all, I said a woman. I said straight away, Sarah. And then they said about the man. I said Trevor. I felt really sick.
The hypotheses that I considered in this case were, first, that Joy Bolton had been killed by Sarah Mackenzie. Second, that Joy Bolton had been killed by Sarah Mackenzie, assisted by Trevor Dibner. Third, that Joy Bolton had been killed by the robber who had attacked Sarah Mackenzie earlier that day.
As you can see, I got scratched, and she said, yeah, I can use that later.
The reason that Sarah was suspected was the result of her, frankly, bizarre behaviour at the scene, as well as a robbery that she'd reported earlier in the day, which put her within the vicinity of the murder at the right time of the murder. Trevor was suspected as Trevor had been to Sarah Mackenzie's address before going back to find Joy, which was thought to be unusual and led to him being suspected of Joy's murder.
With the former couple now in custody, investigators need evidence and turn to the residence of Ash. The smallest observation will be vital in proving their case.
A neighbour of Joy's had seen a figure who he initially described as being male, but later wasn't sure if it was a male or a female, who was dressed in dark clothing with a mask and carrying a white carrier bag, approaching Joy's door and hammering on the door for some time until the door was opened. Another neighbour had heard a disturbance. There was another neighbour upstairs who again saw a figure approaching the door, so there was a lot of consistent evidence.
The neighbours help police establish a timeline around Joy's murder, but the details are sketchy, leaving detectives with a number of possible scenarios to examine.
I think it's difficult when you're in that situation. Living in such a quiet village, also, there's the element of not wanting to cause a fuss. Seeing someone walking in dark clothing in the street and being at the door. As much as an argument did happen and neighbours heard what was going on, you don't expect murder.
While officers on the ground try to piece together events leading up to the murder, detectives are interviewing 64-year-old Trevor Dibner and 61-year-old Sarah Mackenzie.
After Trevor had been arrested, he was interviewed and gave a full account of what had happened. He said that on the day this happened, they'd followed their normal routine, that he'd got out of bed and Joy had made his sandwiches, kissed him goodbye, and he'd gone off to work where he was doing MOT tests. He said during the course of the day he would normally phone Joy. He did so but was unable to get hold of her, and he became quite worried that something may have happened to her. Perhaps she'd fallen or that there was some problem at home. He decided, because he didn't know that he couldn't leave work and that he would effectively deal with it later.
Why did Trevor go to Sarah's before going back to check his beloved, who he wanted to marry? Why did he go there first and not to Auntie Joy's? Why?
Sarah Mackenzie was arrested. Her initial reaction was one of surprise, as though she didn't understand why this had happened to her. And she maintained that initially. Her initial response to the questions asked by my colleagues who interviewed her was no comment, but in a way that she didn't know what this was about and had no understanding of it. She did become unwell while she was in custody and was taken to hospital.
Meanwhile, Joy's fiancé, Trevor, has been held under suspicion of murder for 36 hours. Detectives are running out of time to charge him.
My name's Trevor and I was Joy's fiancé. Trying to prove your innocence is very hard. Very hard. But yeah, she was just so nice, so genuine. Yeah, she's Joy by name and Joy by nature. The 7 months that Joy and I had together was just out of this world. Out of this world.
The day of his fiancée's death is etched in Trevor's memory.
I left her in the morning and she was fine, and I came home to find her in the evening. You know, it was just gut-wrenching, really. I just knew straight away looking at her, I knew she was dead. I touched her, she was freezing cold, but I don't want to tell you what else I saw because it was gory, you know, and that wasn't by just falling over. But I had to hold it together because I obviously getting arrested, etc. That was another daunting thing for me. I've been, you know, all of a sudden they've stood there and said, Trevor, we're going to arrest you on suspicion of murder. And I'm thinking, but I haven't done anything.
Police released Trevor after questioning, but he still has to be ruled out of any involvement.
Blood staining was found on his clothing. It was all looked at in terms of blood pattern analysis and compared to the account that he'd given, that he'd entered the address, found Joy and knelt down next to her, and it was all consistent with his account. There was nothing on his clothing that would have been consistent with him having been present at the time of the offence.
We were able to take Trevor's account, and there were a number of things that he told us that we were able to check. The movements of his car on ANPR were consistent with his account. His workplace confirmed that he'd spent the day at work to the extent that there was CCTV there which showed he was at work all day. It was very clear that Trevor Dibner was not responsible.
Investigators turned their full attention on 61-year-old grandmother, Sarah Mackenzie. Few people know her better than Trevor.
Sarah's, she's stubborn, and also Sarah's got a, let's say, a controlling streak in her. She likes to be in charge, you know, but that's what she is. That's what she is.
Despite the couple separating, Trevor and Sarah would regularly keep in touch. When she texts to tell him she's been robbed, he's concerned.
Sarah's shown me where she'd had her hair pulled because she's got short hair anyway, and she spoke about it again. And I said, well, okay, but look, I've got to go. Maybe, yeah, perhaps I should have come home earlier in the day, but I don't, what do I say? What do I say to somebody about I need to go home and find, you know, because I can't get hold of somebody? The way I see it, I just had to wait till I got home from work. While I was on my way home, she was texting me to see if, was everything okay, is there something wrong? But I didn't answer her back because obviously I had to deal with calling the ambulance and the police because I'd found Joy on the floor and I quite obviously knew she was dead. Then I texted her back and said, no, it's not. No, it's not okay. And as I say, when the ambulance turned up, she turned up in her car behind it. and come over and stood there and held my arm as if she was coming to comfort me.
On body cam footage, police body cam, him and Sarah holding arms, linked arms, stood near a lamppost outside my Auntie Joy's property.
As Trevor tries to come to terms with Joy's murder and being a suspect, Sarah Mackenzie is released from hospital and taken back to the police station for further questioning. She claims she has no recollection of the day of Joy's murder, but evidence from the local neighbourhood puts her clearly in the frame.
We conducted a number of CCTV inquiries and found a camera on Churchview Road. This captured an image of somebody walking down Churchview Road wearing black clothing. The officer who viewed the CCTV recognised that figure as being Sarah Mackenzie.
And what happened was that in the morning of the day, Sarah Mackenzie went to work as usual, was dropped off at 9:30 in the morning by her work colleague, and proceeded very quickly to change into a full disguise, black clothing, mask, gloves, etc., arm herself with a heavy implement, and walk to Joy Bolton's address.
Along this stretch of pavement, Sarah was walking along towards Joy's house before the murder was committed, dressed in all black, very eerie costume, walking with a lot of purpose towards Joy's house. Almost 15 minutes later, she heads back the same direction, same pavement, same path, after committing the murder, dressed in the same outfit, all black, head to toe, again with purpose. As she walked away from the scene of the crime, she was caught on the CCTV around here.
Evidence from the forensic team at the flat helps piece together what happened inside.
The property Churchview Ash was a ground floor maisonette. Front door opened into a small hallway with a bathroom in front of you. The female was found lay face down with her feet in the threshold of the hallway to the living room and her head pointing into the living room. The head injuries were horrific. The victim had an injury to her forehead, which potentially was the first injury to bleed, and that may have caused the blood within the hallway. The majority of her injury was to the back of her head, and that was likely to have been caused when she was face down in the living room. The post-mortem concluded that the victim would have been rapidly incapacitated, so it's likely that she would have been on the floor when the majority of the blows were inflicted.
Detectives are left in little doubt that Sarah was responsible for the attack on Joy Bolton, and her house is searched.
Given that during her account of the robbery, she stated that she'd returned home and taken a bath, I asked that a scientist attend that address with a CSI to conduct a luminol search. Luminol can detect blood that has been diluted up to 10,000 times. It's an incredible search tool for us where offenders have tried to clean up after they've committed an offence. These images are taken within the bathroom at Sarah Mackenzie's address. This picture shows what can be seen with the naked eye. As you can see, there is no visible blood staining at all. And this image shows those areas with the luminol visible. So that is what a reaction, a positive reaction with luminol looks like. The areas that are marked here are the areas that were swabbed and showed that Joy Bolton's DNA was represented within them. That evidence for us was key. Within that blood, which was swabbed by a CSI, was Sarah Mackenzie's DNA, as you would expect, as it's her bathroom, but also there were very small amounts of Joy Bolton's DNA as well. And although we couldn't categorically say that it was blood, luminol would indicate that it was.
I was confident that we had a good and strong circumstantial case with which to charge Sarah Mackenzie, but we were missing something.
Fingernail swabs and cuttings were taken from Joy, and while Sarah was still in custody, I made a fast-track submission of those swabs and cuttings to the lab. Very quickly, that came back with Sarah's DNA under Joy's fingernails on her right hand, which corresponded to the scratches on the left side of Sarah Mackenzie's face.
In Surrey, analysis of DNA found under murder victim Joy Bolton's fingernails has come back as Sarah Mackenzie's.
Whilst Joy was vulnerable, she did put up a fight, and one of her last actions was to prove crucial in proving this case.
The DNA analysis reveals the sample to be a 1 in a billion match, proving that Mackenzie was at the scene when Joy died.
If, you know, Joy had to stand up to anybody, she would. She did give her last fall, you know. She was very weak, could barely stand up unaided, as I say, but she fought back and slapped, scratched, whatever she did to Sarah's head, and thank goodness she did.
But Sarah says she can explain her DNA being on Joy. She reminds investigators that she too is the victim of an assault.
Sarah implied that the offender had stolen her DNA and planted it under Joy's fingernails after inflicting catastrophic injury. They would have had to have the presence of mind to have thought to have planted the DNA under the fingernail of Joy's right hand, which was in keeping with the scratches on the left side of Sarah Mackenzie's face.
The robbery is that it was intended to give Sarah Mackenzie a reason to be in the area that the murder had happened in case she'd been picked up on CCTV or seen by somebody, because she knew that Joy had scratched her, she knew that the police had her DNA, and she knew that we would find her through that to account for her DNA being on Joy's fingernails.
But Sarah sticks to her story, insisting that she was robbed on the same morning as Joy was attacked. A public appeal is made for information, but investigators find no evidence of a robbery having occurred.
With all of the circumstantial evidence, and now a very good forensic hit, we were satisfied that there was more than enough evidence with which to charge Sarah Mackenzie with Joy's murder.
On the 17th of May 2023, Sarah Mackenzie is formally charged with the murder of Joy Bolton and perverting the course of justice. Police and prosecutors need to prepare for trial and identify a motive. Why would Sarah want Joy dead? A delve into the months leading up to the murder throws up some clues after Trevor left Sarah for Joy.
A fire was reported to the fire service initially of a shed in Sarah Mackenzie's front garden. At the time, it was treated as being of a suspicious origin. It was noted later that most of the property that was destroyed belonged to Trevor. Sarah Mackenzie was likely to have set the fire herself.
To me, it doesn't take much to work out what the problem was, why it happened. It purely happened because I put on Facebook the previous day that we'd got engaged. I mean, it's pretty obvious from that.
The fire was not the only disturbance that Sarah was accused of creating.
When he left her, she had damaged his property, thrown it out of the window, cut up his leather jacket, burnt photographs of his family.
And then a couple of weeks later, she then gets, my auntie gets a message on her phone, a shouting down message, you're this, you're that, you know, really nastily.
People say to me it's jealousy, and I do understand that people do get jealous, but do you still have to go to that length? Is there a necessity to go to that length?
Within 6 months of the brutal murder of Joy Bolton, 61-year-old Sarah Mackenzie stands trial. She pleads not guilty.
On Thursday, the 11th of May 2023, between 10 o'clock and 10:20 a.m, Joy Bolton opened her front door to someone. Shortly after opening the door, that person proceeded to bludgeon her to death with a heavy implement. These are the first words that the jury heard about the case that they were about to try. They knew it was a murder. They knew nothing else.
5 weeks it went on for. Long 5 weeks. Cold, wet, windy, horrible. Reliving every moment.
It was just awful. It was awful every time going into that courtroom to think what you're going to hear next.
Sarah Mackenzie presented herself, as we anticipated she would, as somebody who herself was vulnerable and playing on her age.
I sat where I couldn't see her because I couldn't bear to face her for what she had done to my dear sister Joy.
But I think the worst thing is just knowing that Sarah didn't do it 20 plus times only. She kicked her as well. Like some, I don't know, like a dead thing at the side of the road, maybe. To hear that my auntie's flat was a blood-splattered place. A murder scene.
Sarah Mackenzie instructed her lawyers to go down the route of trying to blame someone, but it was plain from the police evidence, and indeed the evidence we called via the police officers, that there was no foundation to suggest that anybody else was a possible candidate for this crime.
After weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
It didn't take the jury long to convict Sarah Mackenzie. That came as no surprise in reality, given the strength of the evidence.
Sarah Mackenzie is found guilty of murder and perverting the course of justice. She's sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years.
She just stood there and grinned. As much as say, oh well.
I'm sorry, at the end of the day, 26 years is still not going to bring Joy back. You know, I know it's supposed to be a life term, and in theory, she'll die in jail. But at the end of the day, that doesn't bring Joy back. She was just the love of my life.
It was almost Shakespearean in terms of the motivation, the jealousy, and what that can do. Most people resist it. Unfortunately, for Joy Bolton, not Sarah Mackenzie.
In this particular case, which was a brutal, unprovoked and sustained attack on a vulnerable woman who had done nothing more than start a relationship with somebody, I felt enormous pride at the work that with the team that I work with. We were able to bring Sarah Mackenzie to justice, and that she is now in a place that she can cause no more harm to anybody else.
This case was exceptional. It's not often, if ever, that you have grandmothers appearing in a dock murdering their love rival. Someone who was completely normal, who was, as per the jury's verdict, enraged by jealousy and spite. It will remain in our memories for as long as we live, I'm sure.
A year on, and Joy's family are trying to come to terms with life without her.
My favourite memory of Joy is she'd always be there if you wanted somebody to talk to, and vice versa with me. She didn't deserve what she got. Didn't deserve it at all.
I go and see Auntie Joy at the grave, and I take my dog with me, because she loved my dog. And I sit and chat. It's not the same. She don't laugh anymore. I find it hard. I'll be driving through Ash, which isn't very often, because I can't bear it. Not round Auntie Joy's, I don't go round that way. Not ever since. But I look at the shops, see an old lady with a trolley, and I always look back. It's that Auntie Joy. This is not Auntie Joy. So you don't just murder one person. You hurt everybody.